Welcome to the panel discussion for the film Dolores. My name is Wendy Waxman-Kern, and I am the 4-H program coordinator for San Juan County WSU Extension, and I will be your host for this event. Before we begin, I would like to share a land and labor acknowledgement and community commitments prepared collaboratively by the Ag Summit Steering Committee. We recognize and honor all peoples who have ancestral ties to these lands and waters. We recognize and honor our ancestors and all those living who have contributed their labor, experience, and knowledge to growing food and nourishing communities. It is our hope the summit, including this event, can offer a next building step in building relationships, educating, and creating space for the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color that have been silenced, marginalized, and excluded from local and larger food and agricultural conversations. With great gratitude, we welcome our panelists who will be sharing their knowledge, experience, and wisdom with us today. Recognizing that we may have challenging conversations today, we invite you to participate in these community commitments while listening and participating in today's discussion and Q&A. We will actively listen and honor the experiences that others have lived. We will create a space that allows for learning and growth. If you are someone who speaks easily, move up into a listening role. If you listen easily, we encourage you to move up into a speaking role and ask questions. We will have grace with each other. We will acknowledge mistakes and commit to change. I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors and partners who help us to continue to offer the San Juan Islands Ag Summit year after year. And lastly, before I introduce today's facilitator, a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded, so you may access it later. The chat is disabled for this webinar. We welcome you to add questions to the Q&A box as you think of them. We will do our best to get through and answer. You will receive an invitation to an evaluation of today's event at the end of the session. Please fill it out. Your input helps us create better programming. With that, it is my honor to introduce today's discussion facilitator, Lerner Limbach. Lerner is the general manager and co-founder of the Orcas Food Co-op. He is a 4th-generation cooperator and is currently pursuing a master's degree in cooperative management. A 20-year resident of Orcas Island, Lerner has also served on the Agricultural Resources Committee of San Juan County since 2013 and as chair of the committee for 5 of those years. Lerner will introduce our panelists and start today's discussion with a few questions, and then we'll take as many audience questions as time will allow. With that, I pass it to you, Lerner.
Thanks, Wendy, and just want to express my gratitude to everybody who put this event together. It's an honor to be here with you all today and to welcome our amazing panelists. Our first panelist, Dolores Huerta, is a labor leader and community organizer. She has worked for civil rights and social justice for over 50 years. In 1962, she and Cesar Chavez founded the United Farm Workers Union. She served as vice president and played a critical role in many of the union's accomplishments for 4 decades. In 2002, she received the Puffin Nation $100,000 prize for creative citizenship, which she used to establish the Dolores Huerta Foundation. The foundation is connecting groundbreaking community-based organizing to state and national movements to register and educate voters, advocate for education reform, bring about infrastructure improvements in low-income communities, advocate for greater equality for the LGBT community, and create strong leadership development. She has received numerous awards, among them the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award from President Clinton in 1998. In 2012, President Obama bestowed Dolores with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award in the United States. She has also received the 2021 USA Today Women of the Century Award and Glamour Magazine's Women of the Year Award. Our second panelist is Edgar Franks. Edgar Franks is the Washington State Campaign and Political Director for Familias Unidas por la Justicia, where he works with union leadership and allies in the development and implementation of the Just Transition framework that centers food sovereignty and worker organizing in innovative models of participatory democracy, such as people's movement assemblies and tribunals. Edgar has strong farm worker roots in Skagit County, where he grew up. Edgar honed his organizing skills, supporting the formation of the first independent farm workers union in Washington State since 1986. As an organizer, he works in Whatcom and Skagit counties and sometimes travels to Eastern Washington to meet with farm workers as needed and supports their organizing efforts, working with union organizers of Familias Unidas por la Justicia. And with that, I'm gonna move into the first question. So I wanted to start off with what are the local and regional issues you're working on? Actually, I'm sorry. Before I jump into the first question, I wanted to just ask you both to take a few minutes and give an overview of your current work before we move into the questions. Let's start with you, Dolores.
Well, thank you. Well, we have the Dolores Huerta Foundation, which I formed after I left the United Farm Workers. And we are doing a lot of work. We've been doing a lot of COVID relief right now. We've raised money so that we could give resources to some of those families that were not eligible for other types of relief. Many of them undocumented of workers. And of course, many of them are farm workers, are the people that we work with. We actually are in 4 different counties in the Central Valley of California, 3 Fresno, Tulare, and Kern, and also in Los Angeles County up in the high desert. One of our chapters has a big task of feeding the homeless people. They've sort of adopted a homeless camp and they make sure that they get hot food served to them. We're also right now canvassing actually our folks have got their masks on and they've got the shields and the masks and they're going door to door and they're providing a relief. I mean, information about what resources are available to people and also providing them the masks that they need during this pandemic. We have a big youth group in all of our different areas, and our youth group, they pretty much participate with what we do, but they also have their own youth development lessons that they receive. We're very active in the state legislature, supporting many pieces of legislation to help the people that we serve. And we have a huge education program. We're active in about 17 different school districts, and basically trying to eliminate the school to prison pipeline, fighting the discrimination that we face in our schools. We sued our high school district here in Bakersfield, California. By the way, Bakersfield, California is the most conservative county in California. This is the area that Kevin McCarthy, who is the Republican head of the House of Representatives, this is where he's from. So, and this county is very embedded with racism. And the lawsuit that we filed against the Kern High School District was because of racism. They they expelled, literally kicked out of school over 2,000 students that were Black and brown. I would say about 95% of them were Black and brown. And so we sued them for implicit bias. They have, from the 2,000 that they expelled, we have got that number down to 21, from 2,000 to 21. And so we're still working on that because some of the things that they were supposed to do, they still haven't done. They were supposed to do a Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month. And of course, they didn't do it. Oh, I forgot to mention that 70% of the students are students of ethnic backgrounds, the majority of them Latino. Okay, so this is just an example of the systemic racism that we're trying to fight. But in our organizing, because we do grassroots organizing, we tell folks when we organize them that number one, nothing is going to change unless they get involved. Number two, they can't do it by themselves. You've got to have an organization to make it happen. We have to take direct, non-violent action to change things, and that they can't expect anybody to come and do it for them, that they are the ones that have to get out there and make the changes, and they do. And then, of course, some of them get elected to school boards and recreation boards and city councils. And of course, now with redistricting, we're very active in redistricting. So hopefully after the redistricting is over, we're going to have many more of them that will be representing their communities where they live. So this is our aim. It's about building political power, but doing it from the grassroots level.
Thanks so much. Okay, Edgar, go ahead.
All right. Great to be here with everyone. Thank you for inviting, and happy Passover. I think some of the regional work and some of the scope of work that we've been working on, it's kind of twofold, I think. Some of it is policy, even though that's really not our priority as a union. Our focus has always been, organizing workers. If there's no workers, there is no union. And it's definitely needed in Whatcom, Skagit, all over the area. So our primary focus right now is going out, talking to farm workers all over the county. Obviously COVID is priority number one, getting workers the equipment they need and everything to be safe in their housing and with their families, giving food out. Yes, last week we had a big event where we gave out like thousands of boxes of food to farm workers, also with rental assistance and masks and all that. We've been helping people register to get their vaccines. I actually have a vaccine appointment right after this. So that's been our number one priority, the health and safety of workers. Our organizing, we're really into organizing locally, but however, because there are so few organizations or unions that specifically address the needs of farm workers, we've been asked to go outside of our area here in Western Washington. We know for the majority of last year, we were in Yakima and the Yakima Valley supporting a series of strikes that were organized by apple processing workers, where thousands of people were getting sick and hundreds unfortunately died because the help was so late in arriving. We also had the issues of H-2A guest worker program workers that were also not being protected. So we've been part of an oversight committee in Washington State to change policies and really address just figuring out why the H-2A program has blown up so much in Washington State. And it's causing, we're talking about the food system and labor. That's, I think one of the big issues that we really need to investigate here in Washington State, this issue of the H-2A workers and the power imbalance that exists there. Yeah, we've been trying to work on all fronts. Obviously, our priority is our local community here in Skagit, Whatcom, San Juan Islands also. But trying to figure out what can we do to cause those systemic changes that are needed. As you read in the bio, we're committed to the Just Transition framework about envisioning a new food system, because we know the food system that exists right now is not good. It's it's causing climate change, exploits labor and resources, and that's not a path we can continue. So part of that Just Transition also involved us getting into an area fairly recently into policy and decision making with legislators in Olympia. So we've been helping with the Washington Strong Act with Representative Lekanoff and Liz Lovelet, trying to get that through. the HEAL Act, which focuses and highlights environmental justice and policymaking. And also, again, shifting our attention to farm workers, trying to pass overtime for Washington farm workers. Hopefully, we'll get that bill signed in a couple of weeks. And being on the H2A oversight committee with working with the governor's office to again really look into solve the problems of the H2A program here in Washington State, which hopefully can lead to something at the federal level.
That's actually a great segue. My first question, and thanks so much for the overview, had to do with what are the local and regional issues you're working on and how do they tie in with the broader struggles? I'd be curious to hear more about the H2A for sure and how working on that locally ties in with the national efforts. And yeah, anything else that you have to add about local and regional issues you're working on, how they tie in with the broader struggles?
Is that?
Yeah, now it's a free for all. Either one of you. Yeah, go ahead, Dolores.
Thank you. Well, I agree with Edgar that the H2A program is really a negative. It really negatively impacts on the wages of farm workers. It's really a slave program. And of course, that's one of the things that we're fighting right now is racism, because we know that racism started with slavery. And unfortunately, the H2A program is what I consider a step up from slavery, because the workers that don't have rights, they're not covered with Social Security. They don't get unemployment insurance, at least in the state of California where we have unemployment insurance. They're not able to join a union, and they're captive. They're totally, completely captive, and they're brought in basically to displace the local farm workers. And whenever H2A workers are brought in, the wages are dropped, and the growers, of course, they prefer to have their slaves rather than have the local farm workers. So it has a devastating impact also on the local communities. So I'm happy to see that Mr. Franks is actually working against this issue. I think it's a very, very important issue. And we know that under the Trump administration, they brought in many, many more H2A workers. And actually, when Hilda Solis, who was the first Latina to be on Obama's cabinet, and before that, actually, when we passed the amnesty bill in 1986, which legalized a lot of farm workers, and I always like to remind people that it was Senator Ted Kennedy who did the heavy lifting to get that bill passed. And I was working with Senator Kennedy in Washington, D.C. So we made it very strict for them to bring in H2A workers. The Trump administration diluted those protections for local workers. And so now we're stuck with this. And hopefully President Biden, we have a new Secretary of Labor now, as we know, and hopefully that we can change that and bring it back to where it was before, because the restrictions that we had put into the law were, number one, they had to recruit local workers. Workers had to be paid the same wages, or to be any H2A workers would have to be paid the same wages as the local workers. And they couldn't do this without going into the community to recruit local workers. So it meant radio ads, newspaper ads, and actually have local recruiters come out there, because we know we have a lot of especially young people of color, Latinos basically, that are out of work. They don't have work. And agricultural work is a very a dignified work. And we know the farm workers that put the food on our table every day. Yeah. And I think many of them are finally getting recognized as essential workers, at least in the state of California. They have now been recognized as essential workers. And I think even with the American Rescue Plan that was just passed, they are recognized as essential workers, because at least in California, they have been given priority in terms of the vaccinations, which we are also doing vaccine clinics like Mr. Franks is. So that's a step forward. But I think we have to go a lot further. For instance, I was on a Zoom this morning with people from Colorado who were celebrating Cesar Chavez Day. And in Colorado, they have a farm worker bill that they're trying to pass now. And it really just gives farm workers the basic things like overtime pay, as Mr. Franks also mentioned, the fact that they can't reduce their minimum wage or make it separately, and a lot of provisions that industrial workers have been given those benefits for 85 years. since 1935 when they passed the National Labor Relations Act, you know? One would think, well, why does it, that it takes almost 100 years for farm workers to be treated with respect and to be given the basic rights, you know? And it wasn't until the farm workers got toilets in the fields when we in the United Farm Workers went out on strike and did our boycotts and everything. But from the time I signed my first contract, my first collective bargaining agreement with toilets in 1966, then it didn't become a law until Jerry Brown got elected, I think 1970, did not become a national law until 1982. Almost 20 years to get farm workers to have toilets, you know? And so we know that but I think that in today's world, when things are moving much more rapidly, when people's attentions are now focused on racism, when literally people have to be outed whether they're racist or not, you know? And I think that the things are going to be moving a lot faster. So we're hoping that the law in Colorado gets passed. It's now in the Senate in the state of Colorado to give farm workers these basic rights. Oh, I wanted to mention that in California now, well, we do have a Cesar Chavez Day holiday. It's a paid holiday. I have a recognition day for myself, and then our Filipino Vice President of the United Farm Workers, Larry Edong, he also has a recognition day. But now they are considering a farm worker day. And I think it's going to pass. I think our governor is going to pass, sign it when it passes the legislature. And that will be good because that way it will just remind everybody that farm workers feed us. And the other thing is that the Farm Bureau is supporting it. And so now we see that, once you get something into a law, the growers have to comply, and then they do it because they have to. And now they say they don't mind it.
Dolores, could you, so there's been a lot of talk about H2A program, which is such an important topic right now. And I know there's a lot of people that probably are on this who haven't really heard of the H2A program. So would you mind just giving just a quick, clear description of what the H2A program is and why is it, why is it a negative thing?
Is that for me or Mr. Franks?
Oh, either one is fine. If you could answer it.
Well, I can answer because, when we started the United Farm Workers, that's one of the things that we were fighting for. And we were finally able to eliminate the bracero program, as they call it then. Bracero means arms in Spanish. And we were finally able to eliminate the bracero program in 1962, or excuse me, 1963. And once we did that, then it was so much easier to organize the workers into a union, but it was very, very hard to do it while they had the bracero program. And this is basically, it's a foreign worker program so that, our government can bring in foreign workers from, mostly they come from Mexico, but actually we had a lot of foreign workers that were brought into the state of Washington. And in fact, I think we filed the United Farm Workers, we filed a lawsuit because they had foreign workers that were, being brought in from Thailand, if I remember correctly. And it was quite a scandal because these workers had to borrow money to be able to come. And then they were kind of held in hostage. And then they couldn't pay the money. They weren't being paid any wages they could possibly catch up. And so this has been going on since World War II, actually. That's when it started, because when so many people were taken off to war in World War II, then they had to bring in people to do the agricultural work. So the program started, I think, in 1942 or 43, right after the war started. But then it kept going and going and going. Even after the war ended, they were still bringing in. So over the course of, and I think we finally, as I said, in 1962, by that time, they had brought in several million. And it got so bad. And I worked on this program for so long to try to get rid of it. And I worked with a lot of the braceros that they would, growers would actually have a crew of workers, and then they would literally rent them to other growers. And they got fabulously rich because back there, it doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but every farmer got money from the government to feed the workers. And so I know you all know who the Chargers are. That's a really a football team here in California. The owner of the Chargers, and I happen to know him because we grew up in the same town, and I knew him when we were kids. He became fabulously wealthy, off of feeding the braceros, because they got the money from the government to feed them, but then the kind of food that they gave them was not nutritious, and many of the workers suffered so much. So I had a lot of cases of those braceros. The good thing that happened is after the program ended in 1962 or 63, I can't remember which year, but our government legalized a lot of the braceros. Okay, so and it kind of happened without any legislation. And there was no law that passed. Just all of a sudden, all of the braceros were legalized. Okay, so a lot of the families that we have right now, like Mexican, especially Mexican families, were legalized during that period of time.
Thank you. So I want to see if Edgar has anything to add about H2A and sort of how that ties in with the national issue and other local issues maybe. And then I have some other questions.
No, I think, I mean, we're trying to, I think that legacy that Dolores Huerta and the UFW have left us of, fighting these exploitative programs. It's something that we continue here in Washington State. If y'all remember in Sumas, there was a huge farm here of like 2,000 acres of blueberries where workers were out working for like 12 hours a day when it was like that wildfire in British Columbia, and just like workers were just falling and passing out, and unfortunately one passed away. But out of that, came a lawsuit. The farm was penalized. And then that started also a series of strikes around the Washington State that we were involved in, that all involved H2A workers from, Kennewick to Mattawa and Quincy, and all under, the same things that Dolores just mentioned. It's the same thing, human trafficking, from bringing workers from California to Washington, withholding passports. If workers speak out, they get blacklisted. So yeah, in essence, we're in agreement that it is a quasi-slave program, just legalized. And it's causing great harm to farm workers, both the ones that are getting brought in and the domestic workers that get displaced by the program.
So
there was a lawsuit that was filed by one of the public interest law firms there in Seattle, and they represented a group of workers in the Yakima Valley, and they had been displaced by the H2A workers, and they won their lawsuit. And they invited me to come and be there with them when they got their checks. So, but that's very rare that happens, because you really got to know workers that are knowledgeable. You've got to have a legal representation, people that will offer to represent them. But it happens a lot, and that's why the growers would prefer to have, as I said before, would prefer to have slaves and pay them less, but they do the local workers.
So there's been a couple questions typed in that are really actually good, tied in with what you're talking about. And so I want to see if I can just ask those together. So can you, one, can you describe a little more the conditions right now of the housing that farm workers have, food, rest breaks, paid vacation, things like that, and talk a little bit about that. And then how is that improved when they're covered for farm workers who are part of a union? And then also how many farm workers are covered in a labor contract in Washington and in California? Either one of you, whoever knows the answer.
I know in Washington State that the United Farm Workers, of course, when I was still with the union, we were able to get the wine companies up there. I have to remember the name of the wine company, but yeah, so they have contracts with one of the wine companies up there. And my understanding, the last time I was in Washington State, just before the pandemic, they have a number of contracts with some of the dairies there. And so the United Farm Workers, I think they do still have organizers that are working in that area. So in terms of the housing conditions, I think maybe Mr. Franks can probably give a better description of that than I can, because I haven't been up there recently. In California, obviously when farm workers have a union contract, they make more money. They're going to get a pension plan when they retire from working. Of course, in the state of California, we also have unemployment insurance for farm workers. We also have the overtime for farm workers also. So one of the things that is now being considered in the legislature is that farm workers can choose their union. Oh, we have the Agricultural Labor Relations Law, which allows union to join a union. And a bill is being considered in the state legislature right now that is really going to help more workers unionize, is that they can choose their union with what they call a card check election. So instead of having to have a secret ballot election, which puts a lot of pressure on the workers, they can just choose their union with a signature. And if you consider that your signature is good enough to buy a house, buy a car, get married, get a divorce, that it should be good enough to be able to choose your union.
Awesome. Edgar?
Yeah, I think the housing is still an issue in Washington. Where we have our contract, we do have better housing than before. I know before a lot of workers were living in cramped conditions and, mice in the mattresses and tin roofs and all that. This was just like a couple years ago. It wasn't like a long time ago. It's still the dilapidated housing exists. And we also have this issue about, again, the H-2A program and the housing conditions they're currently in, where a lot of the outbreaks started happening in agriculture because of like packing people into small trailers or small cabins with no 6 feet separation, no ventilation, no real enforcement on people that weren't enforcing the social distancing guidelines from the CDC and the governor's orders. So the housing continues to be an issue, not only for H-2A, but even local workers. Just rent on itself is getting super high. Even in areas in Skagit and Whatcom and rural areas, our rent is starting to go super high, while wages are still very low. So that's another area of concern that we want to really address, the affordable housing crisis, not just for farm workers, but everybody in our community. I mean, we've seen like homeless sweeps happening here in Bellingham for the last couple of weeks, which is sad to see. And farm workers are maybe a paycheck away from being out in the streets if, wages and conditions don't improve. And we want to take it, we're a farm worker union, but I think we still want to, contribute, do our part to make sure everybody does well in addressing those issues because we're all part of the same community here.
And do you know how many farm workers and what portion of farm workers are covered by union contracts right now?
Yes, and so the winery that's on the union UFW contract is Chateau Saint Michel, and I believe in Sunnyside, I think is somewhere over there. And we have, I think there are around 200 or 300 workers under contract, and our union has 500 workers under contract. So if 700 total under contract, and 100,000 workers that still need to be organized. So we consider that an opportunity for organizing.
Awesome. There was a question about the Farm Workforce Modernization Act recently out.
Yeah, I was going to say that in California, of course, there are many more hundreds of workers that have union contracts, particularly in the vegetable industry, the strawberry industry. So
yeah, but it sounds like it's a small percentage.
Yeah, let me just say something though.
Yeah,
and I think that the agricultural community, and I remember hearing the word partners a little while ago. I don't remember what context, but in this Zoom that we're doing, but the agricultural industry they are so hell-bent that not to let their workers unionize, not realizing that the workers are their partners. I can say that when I was with the union and I negotiated the contracts, and many of the employers didn't realize that their workers are actually taking care of their property. I remember one particular grower who didn't know that he was being ripped off by his supervisors. And when we sat down negotiations, the worker said to him, look, you don't realize that one of your managers of your ranch is actually taking equipment and material off of your property to start his own company, So the workers, the farm workers, they care. about the land, they care about the crops, and they're there to protect the employer also. And so again, when we talk about racism, if we can eliminate that racism so that employers can see their workers as human beings, if they can see their workers as equals, if they can see their workers as partners, and take away that opposition that they have to partnering with their workers, let them form a union. A union is an organization. The employers have their organizations. They belong to Western Growers. They belong to the Farm Bureau Federation. Um, Somebody's knocking on my door. Hold on just a second.
All right.
Anyway, so uh, you know, they don't realize that if they can get away from that mindset, and it comes down to slavery, because they have that racism against the workers, because most of the workers are brown or black or Asian. If they can just get away with that and say, okay, we're going to be equal, we're going to be equal with our workers, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, treat them as equals and not as people that are lesser than they are.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hear, hear. So Edgar, any follow up to that, and then specifically, you know, thoughts on the Workforce Modernization Act?
Oh yeah.
We're all curious
Well,
about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there still needs to be a lot of work around the relationship between employers and workers. I think we're considered a threat when workers organize, even though it's for the well-being of the employer. You know, you want healthy workers, and you know, workers just want their fair share. You know, sometimes it's, you know, even something as basic as a clean bathroom. You know, something that's really, you know, not super revolutionary or anything. People just want to be treated with dignity. So it's in the benefit, you know, to work with your workers, you know, and don't consider them a threat, or else that conflict is gonna always be existent. Just gonna be paranoid for forever. About the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, our union has actually come out opposing because of two major components to it. One is the mandatory use of e-verify throughout of all agriculture, which we believe will set a bad precedent for future legislation regarding, you know, if there's a comprehensive immigration reform package put together, that e-verify, which is, you know, it's a program where employers can opt in right now to verify status for workers, whether they have papers or not, which would have a tremendous impact on, you know, workers that are undocumented, which no secret, lots of workers in agriculture are undocumented. So it would, you know, they would find themselves unemployed all of a sudden. And another is again, the expansion of the H-2A program within the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. This bill was written by Dan Newhouse, who's a super conservative grower, who's also our state representative in the Yakima area. And he personally would benefit from an H-2A program and more streamlining. You know, we already mentioned there's a lot of power imbalances within the H-2A program, and believe that this would only be another challenge for farm workers going down the line. So those are our opposition to the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. You know, we believe that workers should just get amnesty, just flat out, because of everything they've done throughout the pandemic and beyond. So, you know, I think that those are the thoughts from our union here.
Well, actually, that's right on point right now, because there is an Immigration Reform Act right now that has already been presented in the Congress. And we know that in Washington State and California, we have great representatives that are going to vote for this. But we know that in the other states, especially in the South and the Midwest, we're going to have to put a lot of pressure to try to get this bill passed. And it will give the farm workers, Senator Feinstein from California has had a bill now in order to give the farm workers and all farm workers will be treated specially, and they would be given their legal status. So, but it's going to take, I think, a lot of work on all of our parts to contact people in other states, you know. And I know Washington State is right next to Idaho, you know, here in California, we're right next to Nevada. And we have to reach over to Arizona and make sure that we, and I think Arizona, we have 2 good senators now there too. One of them is kind of waffling on the filibuster, but Mark Kelly, I think, would vote actually to give for that law. But we have to work to really maybe make sure that we get all of the Democrats to vote for it, because as we know, the Senate is evenly divided right now, you know, with Democrats and Republicans. I know our Kamala Harris, our vice president, will definitely vote for it. But so I just say to everybody, like folks there in Washington State, if you have friends or relatives in Idaho, please call them, you know, and tell them to contact their senators. And we've got to do I think a massive campaign to get immigration reform approved. We know it's, and I just like to remind everybody, you know, when we talk about immigrants coming to the United States, that the first immigrants were from Europe. I mean, when we talk about immigrants, and they were not asked to show any kind of a green card, and there was no border patrol, you know, at the Atlantic Ocean to prevent them from getting in. So we just have to remember that. And when we talk about legalization and citizenship for immigrants, is all of our European immigrants know that it you know, they benefited from this. And so we have to constantly remind people, and I think that also helps us to get rid of racism, that this was a brown country when the immigrants from Europe arrived here. And we welcomed you. We welcomed you. And so now we've got to, you know, say we've got to welcome the other immigrants that are coming here.
Yeah. So really quick, I just want to do a time check. It's 3:40, and there are some other questions typed in the chat. I'm going to try to get through the other question prompts that I have, and then we'll see if we have more time for questions. But I think that questions that are typed in the Q&A as well, we can probably send the answers out later. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea. But next I wanted to ask, what would success look like for you? And, you know, specifically, what are some strategies that you're currently using or want to use to get to success? And why don't we start with Edgar?
Well, I think how success looks like for us is to give workers different pathways out of, you know, generational poverty and exploitation. Whether it be, you know, through, you know, legislation and policy, and that's one way, union contracts and, you know, worker representation, that's another way. But I think one of the ones that we're really focusing on and want to build off of is, you know, what would it look like if farms were run by workers? If they had access to capital and land and, you know, all those things you need to set up a farm. And we believe that workers, because of the history, you know, we're people of the land, and in our union, almost 100% are people from indigenous communities from Mexico and Guerrero that have sown the land for thousands and thousands of years, for generations. However, when they cross the border, you know, they're put into these conditions where, you know, they have to work and hustle and, you know, work themselves to the bone to barely scrape by with no land or anything. So we believe, because of those experiences and the knowledge that farm workers possess, that they also have the skills and knowledge to build sustainable farms free from exploitation, whether from pesticides or abusive bosses. So that's one of our visions for our union, to create these paths so workers can someday, you know, have that opportunity to have their own farms. And, you know, talking about just transition, you know, transition away from industrial big corporate agriculture to communal, self-sustaining and food sovereignty minded principles. And I think we can do it because we're already doing it here in Whatcom County with a small farm worker cooperative called Tierra y Libertad, which has been operating for now 5 years, barely. We still have to pay off all the acres, but it's there and it's serving as a model. So I think that's the vision, I think, to someday transition agriculture in those ways, to give the means to workers to be well, not to be super rich and whatever, but just to be well. I think that's more important.
Awesome, thank you. Dolores.
Well, I love that vision. I think it would be wonderful if we could get back to the idea of the family farm and get away from agribusiness. If we could have organic farming everywhere so that we could stop the use of these economic poisons that are put on our food. And I think some of this can be accomplished actually through legislation. And I'm a big believer in democracy. And I do believe that ultimately, whatever we want to happen has to be put in the form of a law. We have to have legislation so that can be implemented where people can be held accountable. So and I just want to say I'm so happy that you're working up there in the Yakima Valley, because there I think with I've always wanted to go back to the Yakima Valley just to do a big voter registration drive there. I know there's a lot of great leadership in that area, but it's time that they get a representative from the Yakima Valley that looks like them. I think on redistricting, which is another thing that we are working on here with my foundation. We're very, very involved in redistricting to make sure that people get the representation that not only looks like them, but that has the same values as they have. And so I think the way that we're going to change a lot of the issues that are facing us, and not only for farm workers, but just for people of color, is that we've got to erase the inequities that exist in our society. And we have to do it through legislation. There's some pieces of legislation that are in the Congress right now that are, besides the Immigration Reform Act, we also have the For the People Act. And again, sometimes on the West Coast, we get a little spoiled because, we do have such great representation in our legislatures and in our Congress. But, we know we have these other states. For the People Act, by the way, is to prevent the voter suppression that has been going on, and also to get the money out of politics so we can have public campaign financing, and so that people that look like Edgar can run for office. So you don't have to be a millionaire to run for a public or political office. And so that's going to be really important. The other thing is a woman. I have to say that we have to fight for women's equality. So there's another bill that I'm really asking everybody to support, and that's the Equal Rights Amendment for women. And we can make history in 2021. Last year we celebrated the fact that women got the right to vote, but in 2021, we can actually celebrate the fact that we can get into the Constitution of the United States, the Equal Rights Amendment. The United States is only one of the few countries in the world that has not ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. It's also in the US Senate. So we have a lot going on in the US Senate. And again, I want to encourage everybody, call your friends, call your relatives in the other states and ask them to call their senators to support immigration reform, For the People Act, so that we can make sure that all of these state legislatures that are passing laws to keep people from voting, especially people of color, and of course, the Equal Rights Amendment. And if I could, Mr. Limbach, if I could give the website for the Equal Rights Amendment so everybody can write it down if they want to get more information. It's very simple. It's ERA, yes, 2021.org. ERAYES 2021.org.
Thank you so much. Yes, thanks for mentioning that. I totally agree. Thanks so much for all those solutions and sharing that with us, because I think that it's a lot of times easy to focus on the negative. And so one of the things we wanted to do was just really have some positive, there's actually a lot of positive stuff happening and real ways to make change. So we only have about 10 minutes left. And so I I wanted to wrap up sort of by just having you elaborate a little bit on how other ways that people can get involved, and what would you like to leave the participants with today, and how can people get involved with what you're working on. Yeah. We can just do Dolores and then we'll go back to Edgar.
Okay, well, I think that all of us have to become missionaries. We all have to become healers. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that racism is a sickness. And we know that people are being outed because they're racist. And people have to take a position. You're racist or you're not a racist. And those of us that say, well, we're not racist, but it's not enough to be not a racist. We have to be anti-racism, okay? Because this is something that the cancer that we have in our United States that started again with slavery against the indigenous people, against the African slaves that were brought here. And we know that we have to get rid of this because it has been so hurtful, not only to farm workers, but to all communities of color. And so we just have to say, enough is enough. It's time to get over it. And we've got to look at all of our institutions, public and private corporations. Everybody has to dig in right now and declare themselves to be anti-racist and start doing something about the healing. We have to be the healers. Like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, racism is a sickness and we have to be the healers. And so I just want to ask everybody to do whatever we can within our power to make sure that we end racism in our school systems. In California, they just voted to have ethnic studies in every single high school as a mandatory requirement. And we've got to get that down into our elementary schools from kindergarten, because kids are not born racist. They're made racist by the culture that they grow up in or their parents. And so we have to stop this. So we have to have ethnic studies in kindergarten. We have to have women's studies so that little boys will know that little girls are equal to them, maybe not in physical strength, but definitely in intelligence, and we can stop the abuse against women, okay? Labor studies, so people will know what labor unions are, that they can understand why workers, because labor unions are workers organizing in their own organization to represent them, just like the employers have their own organizations, okay? And also civic studies, I think so. And in civic studies, so people understand the importance why everybody has to be a voter and why we have to elect progressive people that have good values to be our representatives. And then one other thing I just want to throw in there, when I talk about women's studies, I also want to talk about gender studies. And so the discrimination against our LGBTQ community can also be ended, because these are the opposition that is keeping us from going forward. They're using women's reproductive rights, the right to abortion, using gay rights as ways to divide us, to divide people. And we have to say, hey, those are, if someone is LGBTQ, we have no business about who they love or who they marry. It doesn't affect your family, right? The same thing with women's right to abortion. That doesn't affect your family at all. And there's a great Mexican president, his name was Benito Juarez, and he had a statement that I like to share when people are kind of confused on these issues. And his saying was, respecting other people's rights is peace. What a woman does with her body is her human right. If somebody wants to marry somebody of their own sex, that is their human right. So let's just remember that. So, and share that conversation with us. One other thing, remember this, let's only use the word race when it's attached to human race. Otherwise, there are ethnic groups, because we are all one human race. We are Homo sapiens, and our human race began in Africa. Human civilization began in Africa. So we are all Africans. Share that too at the dinner table, okay? Let's see what the reactions are. But yes, we all have to take individual responsibility. As Robert Kennedy said just before he was assassinated, he said, we have obligations and responsibilities to our fellow citizens. So all of us have to take that seriously. We're going to save our planet from global warming. We've got to get out there and we've got to advocate. We've got to advocate, and we can make it happen. Sí se puede.
All right, Edgar, what would you like to leave us all with? And yeah, how can people get involved?
Yeah, well, I wanted to first pay my respects to Dolores Huerta and all the work, they did building the union and, giving us a chance to fight, a blueprint to fight back. So I'm forever grateful for that. And all the things you just mentioned are all because of worker organizing and the tradition of the UFW. So I first wanted to say that. Honored to be here, sharing space. Um, so I think some of the things that we encourage people to do is that wherever you are, there's always farm workers nearby. And wherever there's farm workers, there's usually people that are out there helping them. So we need to support community-based organizations that are working with farm workers, providing mutual aid or, any kind of support to farm workers, I think is very important. Obviously contacting your legislators and senators is really important. If you want to help us out, we are on the battle for overtime right now here in Washington State. So you can call right now your local House of Representative congressperson, to help us pass that here in Washington State. It just passed the Labor and Commerce Committee here in Washington for overtime for farm workers. And again, I think could come up with legislation or pathways or just community organizing models that benefit everybody, whether you be the small farmer, the worker, the grocer. Really start envisioning what a communal, regional food system looks like. I think that's really, we really emphasize local everything, participatory democracy at a local level where everyone has a voice, whether you have papers or not. I think that's where we want to really focus a lot of our attention to, on top of farm worker organizing, working with allies and community to come up with these solutions. And using everything that we have at our disposal. There's a lot of smart people out there that sometimes aren't given the space and the chance, but hopefully when we recognize them, we give them chances to speak up and we listen to them, because after all, the people with those experiences are the ones that are going to come up with the solutions. So yeah, I think that.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that if people want to learn more about the work of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, we're at doloreshuerta.org. It's really easy to find us. And if they would like to support and become a part of our social justice movement, they can just put in joindhf.org, joindhf.org. And if people want to support us, and also I'm sure Mr. Franks' organization, but if they want to support the Dolores Huerta Foundation, you can do it at give2dhf.org. And I'll okay.
That's awesome. Thank you. And what I can
hf.org. Mm-hmm.
What I can do is I'll connect with both of you. Just make sure that we can maybe include some of that information in a follow-up. I'm not exactly sure what we can do, but I know we have everybody's email address who's on this, and so I'll see if we can get a follow-up out there with a list of links. Yeah, so we're 2 minutes to 4, so I'm just gonna close it out. I just wanted to say that I'm really excited to get more involved, with both of you and follow up. And Edgar, we're right across the water. A couple of years ago, I just wanted to share that I, participated in the Farm Workers March for Dignity. And that's where I first met Edgar, and that was just a really incredibly powerful experience, and opened my eyes a lot. And so yeah, I just wanted to encourage, I think, any opportunities that we have when we're if we're invited to come participate. From personal experience, I found that really powerful. And
one
Dolores,
day we'll march again.
Yeah, one day we'll be able to march again. I look forward to that. And Dolores, it was so special just having you here, and you look great, and it's just such an inspiration. I'm definitely gonna carry this day with me, going forward, and just thank you for making the time and just keeping on fighting and spreading the message. Yeah, just thank you.
I'm kind of excited to learn about your work too, because you said cooperative management. I don't know if that applies to agriculture, but I think it could also apply to nonprofit organizations. Okay, so
it does.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
I would love it if you could put like your number in the chat, or so we can definitely reach out to you, because our organization has grown so big, and when you grow really big, then you have you need a lot of work to make sure that the ship is staying afloat. Okay, so I want to thank you very much for inviting me, and I just want to remind everybody that the way that we say to people that you've got the power, right? And so we say, who's got the power? You've got the power. What kind of power? People power. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And thank you, Edgar, also for your work that you're doing with farm workers.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely stay in touch.
Right.
Thank you. And we're just we'll call it there, and I'll see you guys soon.
And also we want to thank everybody to put this together. Okay. And
Yeah.
hope we see each other in the physical world soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.